Hey everybody, this is Razib with conversation number 36. We're just gonna talk tariffs, maybe other stuff, but we have been liberated.
Stock tips. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know, just you go, Josiah. I've been tweeting a bit about it. It's not like I'm not like a big economics commentator, but I've been kind of pissed, not gonna lie. So I'm tweet a
Yeah.
little bit about it.
Yeah. I have a lot of things to say. Not a lot of them are positive. So, people I think already know what the deal is. My, my summary is I think it's really dumb. I think it's a bad policy. I've tried to, read various justifications for it, which are actually harder to come by than you might think or whatever. And they don't really seem to make a lot of sense. Um, and, we could get into like some of it, but big picture, I don't think it's good. I think, it kind of is going to maybe it's bad economically, right? Bad policy, but also I think there's a risk of it imperiling, you know, broader Trump or MAGA agenda or whatever, a lot of stuff that I am on board with, DEI, whether it's DEI or securing the border or all sorts of other stuff that could fall victim to if the economy goes sideways because of this or it just alienates a lot of people. So, tariffs, and I don't even know. And it's also like, so the part of the I have sympathy for the people who for whatever reason feel like they have to defend this policy because you know when if it's like tariffs on a particular country or a particular industry or whatever, there's a lot of things that you might say, and people, we know some very smart MAGA people, and they're very good at, I would say, when Trump does something, coming up with some sort of semi plausible, sophisticated rationale for why it's actually a good thing, right? And, well, sometimes it's semi plausible, sometimes it's not so plausible, it's creative or whatever. But people usually try and do it. And so when Trump was doing the tariffs on Canada, um, people were talking, well, this is really about the border or fentanyl or the Suez Canal, right? So it's all sorts of other stuff. Or auto industry is critical, X, Y, and Z. Problem the problem with these tariffs is because it's simultaneous, like they put tariffs on 180 countries and everything. A lot of those arguments don't work. Like you can't make an argument that we have to, like, you could say,
Soto.
yeah, right, yeah, exactly. It's like you can't say, okay, well, look, we need these tariffs for like critical national security purposes. It's like, no, you don't need tariffs on Lesotho for national security purposes. Or it's like, well, we need, we're trying to achieve geostrategic objectives. It's like, I don't think you're trying to achieve geostrategic objectives with 180 countries at once. That doesn't make any sense, It doesn't even some of the like broader stuff like reshoring or whatever. Like, is the plan that we're gonna uh like move shoe manufacturing back to the United States? Like it's like, okay, we need steel or we need cars or whatever, but it's like, are we gonna like grow all the bananas here? Or are we gonna? It doesn't like it really. It's hard, right? And then the way that the way that and I found um it's an interesting policy in that uh when you start to look into the details of it, it becomes even weirder and harder to defend. So they said we're doing these are supposed to be reciprocal tariffs. So the idea is, okay, other countries have tariffs on imports from the US. So we're going to put a reciprocal tariff on them. And if that were the deal, then I think there would be an argument about that, because it could be like other countries do have tariffs on us. And if we put a responsive tariff, that could encourage them to, lower their tariffs on our products. And theoretically, you could end up in a world where there was more free trade than there was before, right? So that's the kind of like negotiation type of deal. Would that have worked? You could have all sorts of other arguments, but at least there would be a case. Problem is, it became quickly apparent once they announced the like tariff rates that it was not actually based on other countries' tariffs of our products. In fact, Israel said a week ago, they said, okay, we're going to totally eliminate all remaining tariffs on U.S. products because they knew this thing was coming. And they still got hit with a 17% tariff rate, right? So what is the formula? It turns out that the tariffs are based. I mean, that our tariffs are based not on other countries' tariffs on our stuff, but on the trade deficit, right? It's a formula based on the trade deficit as a percentage of exports or imports or whatever. And so as long as we have a trade deficit with another country, they get a tariff, right? And that's a weird thing because like the US is the world's reserve currency, which means that other countries hold US dollars, right? They sell us stuff and then they hold some of the dollars or securities for their own purposes. And if that is the case, we kind of have to run a global trade deficit. We don't have to have a trade deficit with every single country, but we have to have one kind of overall because otherwise we can't be a reserve currency, and I mean, I'm open to arguments about it. It seems like being the world's reserve currency is actually pretty good for us. In fact, one thing that I've noticed is that people, they'll say, well, we need to do this because otherwise, the world is going to de-dollarize and we won't be the reserve currency. Like they'll say stuff that doesn't make any sense. But even that, even if you thought, okay, look, getting rid of the trade deficit is the end all and be all, right? This is very important. This is what we got to do. It's not entirely clear that these tariffs will do that because other countries can put retaliatory tariffs on our stuff and the economy could shrink. So in theory, the tariffs don't even necessarily reduce our trade deficit. But even if it did, right? Let's suppose that somehow not only did we eliminate our global trade deficit, but we eliminated a trade deficit with every single one of these 180 countries. So we have a trade surplus everywhere, right? There's still a like minimum 10% tariff, So it's like it's so convoluted, and so I feel kind of like some sympathy for people who are like trying to come up with some sort of justification for like why this actually makes sense when it does not. So I've ranted for a while. I'm not done with my rants yet, but I would like to let you have a turn.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll say is if you listen to this podcast, or if Josiah Neely, he's not a squish. So this frustration is a bad sign, first of all. It's not, this is not just like, these are not, people who are mad are not just reluctant Trump voters.
Right.
People who are quiet, like Elon or say Chris Rufo, I'm pretty sure they're actually pretty stressed out for different reasons.
Right.
I think Rufo is probably stressed out. This is going to undermine the domestic agenda. And I think Elon, who is the richest man in the world and has interests all over the world, Mostly China, actually, I think with Tesla. But in any case, he's being very quiet right now because you know, I don't know. The beast is out. Trump likes the tariffs. I mean,
Yeah.
from everything I hear, people around him are trying to keep it in check, and like they cannot. So this is how it works. The Republicans are starting to be restive. They might even engage in some legislative checks if things don't stabilize. So that's one thing. Another thing. Well, actually, like I'm gonna say, like what we're talking about is a big topic. So it has domestic policy implications. Obviously, many of us are upset because of our portfolios or the risk to our businesses, the companies we work for. That's a domestic policy implication. Foreign policy implication is that trade, economics, and the international, economic order is an instrument of American global hegemony. I brought up Lesotho. There's an article about Lesotho, I think, in the New York Times or Wall Street Journal. I don't even know which one anymore. I mean, but it's basically like they have like one of the world's highest tariffs because they do export like a couple $100 million to the United States. I think it's a small amount,
Yeah.
but they're a small country. Okay, Lesotho is a country that's like totally surrounded by South Africa. I think Swaziland is the one that borders, Mozambique and South Africa. But in any case, it's a small country.
Notably, Lesotho. I mean, Trump during the State of the Union said no one knows where that is, right? So, but that didn't
Well, now they
stop.
do.
Yeah, now
Now
they
they
do.
do. It's in the New York Times. But also, their imports are not from the U.S. They're all from South Africa because they're surrounded by South Africa.
Right.
And so they have this. I think that they got screwed because they have this. They're basically de facto part of South Africa economically. I think they have like basically like free trade or something. And so their whole domestic economy with South Africa gets chalked up as international, right? And so it dwarfs anything from the U.S. Anyway, they don't need to use the U.S. So we have a massive trade deficit with them from their perspective, even though it's tiny from ours. So we basically destroyed their like a large part of their economy right now overnight.
Yeah.
Well, what's that going to do? Who are they going to turn to? Well, I mean, you know who they're going to turn to. So a lot of these like poorer countries, like my family's from Bangladesh, they got screwed with tariffs because Bangladesh is it's an export driven economy. And a country like India, for example, is less impacted by this because they have a massive internal domestic economy. To a great extent, America, the U.S. is actually way less impacted by this. I mean, we will be impacted because we are babies and we don't like to become poorer in any way. But compared to some of these smaller export-driven countries, first world, third world, second world, whatever world, we're going to be okay. Some of the big nations are going to be okay, but we'll get flus, but they will get pneumonia. Well, what's that going to do? That's going to undermine our foreign policy standing. We're not going to be seen as a trusted ally, like you set aside our principles. Like America's there for people. We are the global cop. We are the backstop in so many ways, and we don't seem like that right now. And then the last thing I want to say, just on a specific note, our friend Jonathan Keeperman, who we actually saw last week at Natal, he said something which I didn't quote tweet it because like we're friends, but it was like almost like I just like had to get up and walk away from the computer because he's like something about a game of chicken. And I'm like, bro, this is the biggest economy in the world.
Right. Right.
You know what I'm saying? I get what he's saying, but like this is the big. You don't play a game of chicken with the biggest economy in the world. Like
Yeah.
we have way more to lose than whoever we're running into.
Well,
Okay, they're way poorer.
right. Yes. Yeah. And it's not like we're playing chicken with 180 nations simultaneously. It doesn't like, you know, I'm not. So personally, I'm not a big fan of tariffs in general. I'm a free trade guy, for the most part. But
Yeah, I mean I'm similar.
yeah, but there are some cases where I feel like you can make more of a case. Like for China, I think you can make more of a case. You can make
I think there's a national consensus now that we got to like figure out what we're doing with China.
Or there are certain strategic industries. I mean, I like for example, um, I work. My day job is in energy, and there are issues with like large power transformers for the electric grid, and being able to make those in the U.S. That's a real like strategic concern. There are other products like that. I don't know that tariffs are the best way to deal with that, but okay, so you could do that. But like, you know, you're doing this with China, but then also with Canada and with the EU. and with Vietnam and with Cambodia and with Japan and with all of South America, all of Africa, right? It's,
No, it sounds like a parody. It sounds like
it's
we declare war on the world. That's it. You know what I'm saying? It's not like it's like, we're just every country we declare war on. That's how it
yeah,
feels.
yeah. Um, so this, I mean, it's hard for me to take
Well, I mean,
seriously the idea. Yeah.
Josiah, bring up the Vietnam example because I think people are highlighting it because unlike Lesotho, it is a big deal.
Right. So, okay. So Vietnam, I think, has one of the higher um, tariff rates of all the different 180. It's like 46%, something like that. And this is significant for a couple reasons. One is just from like an economic perspective. Vietnam, uh, their economy is heavily dependent on exports to the U.S. It's not mostly what I would consider like strategic stuff. It's like t-shirts, sneakers, some produce.
It's like China a generation ago, maybe.
Correct. Yeah. And yeah, so most of the stuff that we get from Vietnam now, a generation ago, we would have gotten from China. But then as China developed and for like political reasons, we kind of favored Vietnam as a source for that because even though they're a communist country, it's not China. And so it's sort of a way of like, you know, blocking and tackling with China is that we got a lot of that manufacturing to move over to Vietnam. And some of it actually, I think if things had progressed, I think what I've heard is Vietnam was starting to get rich enough where that stuff was going to Cambodia or Laos or other places like that, right? But anyway, so yeah, so it's a huge economic issue of like, are we gonna like move the stuff back here? Well, like what for? And then there are also political there are political factors of like if our plan is to try and isolate China or compete, if we view China as our competitor, then screwing over Vietnam actually hurts that because Vietnam is China's competitor in a lot of this stuff. Um, so yeah, like it's hard to say, and let's just talk. Can we talk like historical for a couple minutes? Because one thing like Trump, he's always been kind of like he's always had like protectionist instincts or whatever. I think you could say like you go back, he's always talking about how we're getting bad deals and trade and this and that. Um, but it does seem that like during his the Mar-a-Lago wilderness years, he seems to have gotten a little bit more fixated on it. And during the campaign and whatever, he kept talking about McKinley, and so on and so forth. And it is true. Um, we think of, or I guess maybe we used to think of the Republicans as being the party of free markets, and the Democrats are more like command and control. But for most of its history, the protectionist tariffs was like a central plank of the Republican Party. They were the tariff party, and the Democrats tended to be free traders, right? So that's true for like McKinley in the 19th century. It's true, like even someone like Calvin Coolidge, who I know a lot of free market people, like you go into their office and they got like a photo of Calvin Coolidge on the wall because he's such a big like limited government free market guy, which he was, but he was like very pro tariff and also very anti immigration, which is another side issue. But so tariffs were a big part of all of that. Really up until after World War II, when there was kind of like more of a consensus that free trade was the thing. However, I was looking, it's like, I, um, I wanted to see, how the scale of these current tariffs um, compare to the past, right? And actually, even though we had a tariff um, on goods, and it was basically how we funded the government back in the 19th century, the tariff rate was the effective tariff rate was much lower than what Trump is doing now, right? Like there's only been two periods in which it's come close to what is uh, going on now. One was a Smoot-Hawley tariff, uh, which was actually even that was not as high as what Trump is doing now, right? Smoot-Hawley tariff done in the like 1930. It was supposed to try and deal with the Great Depression. Some people will say it caused the Great Depression. I don't think that's really accurate, but I think it's fair to say that it did not help, and it was a failure even in its own terms of like it was supposed to like increase exports, but exports fell. But then the only tariff that I think the only time we've ever had a tariff that has been as high as the ones that were announced by Trump is the 1828 Tariff of Abominations. I don't know if you recall this from school. This is so you remember the nullification crisis, and yeah, it almost provoked a civil war because back then, the North kind of liked tariffs because that was where all the manufacturing was in the U.S. and the South they were, they did not like tariffs because they like to export all their agricultural products and import, manufacturing stuff from in Europe or whatever. So it almost provoked a civil war. That's kind of the only time it looked like in the nation. So when things were that high. So even if like Trump wanted to do emulate McKinley, okay, you have like a general tariff, but it would not be like what they're doing now, right? And even some like people will point. I've had some people, I think his name is Mirren or something. I don't know. There's some Trump advisor who put out a paper about this last year, and people were saying, "Oh, if you can't understand the policy unless you read this," and you read it, and it's like, well, we should slowly introduce tariffs over time with like a max 10% rate or something, So it's like, okay, this is not, I don't think it's that sophisticated. It definitely is not following like tariffs. I think are kind of a minority position in general. It's hard to find an economist who supports them, and the people that you can find also are saying don't do it like they've been doing. So I, there's I think there's a temptation for like right wing or MAGA people to try and come up with some sort of they call it 4D chess type of thing, but I think
this is 60 or 70.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, people will have to come up, like people are stretching to 60 or 70. I actually think it's 1D chess, right? It's actually just very simple, which is Trump has just decided, I like tariffs. I don't like the trade deficit, but actually, even if there was no trade deficit, I still like tariffs, right? I don't like foreign trade, I want to sell things, but not buy anything. And how that works monetarily, I don't know.
Yeah, so I think, you alluded to some historical stuff, and, with tariffs, and it wasn't as hot, an issue, but it was an issue, and so as you said, the Republicans were traditionally, the tariff party, but actually, and the Democrats were the free trade party, and it was just, the Democrats were like they were a party not exclusively, but to a great extent of the planters. And the planters export cotton to England, and England, makes cotton textiles. And so, people know that probably from the Civil War that England actually leaned toward the South, even though obviously was not a fan of slavery. But there was an economic connection. New York City under Fernando Wood, talked about splitting from the North, becoming a free city because they were part of that trade. I mean, it wasn't the triangle trade like with slavery, but basically some of these northern ports were, transshipping or whatever the cotton. They were coming up from the South. So there's like all these economic connections, but it even goes like back further. If you talk about like the early republic, Alexander Hamilton, and then later Henry Clay of Kentucky, of the Whig Party, John Quincy Adams, like they had these ideas, especially Clay. Clay articulated this. It's what it's like. I think it's called the American system. It was a developmentalist kind of model where America creates its own internal economy that competes with, mostly Britain at this point with industrialization and whatnot. As opposed to just being a commodity exporter. So in the 19th century and in the early 19th century, America is this agricultural country that's very underpopulated. One reason, immigration was quite open for a long time. and it was exporting raw materials. There were some manufacturers in places like New England, but they were small bore compared to England. They were a secondary center. They were competitive, and so the argument that the Whigs, and before them to some extent, I think Hamilton among the Federalists, but not all the Federalists. But anyway, basically the argument is like we need to make America this great, powerful industrial nation like England is. And yes, that's how they thought of it then. England was the great power. Whereas in the South, they were just, look, we got a good thing. We're trading with England. It's a win-win. We export our commodities, we export our great cotton to them, and they make, much better, whatever, like, shirts or whatever that you can make out of cotton than you can in New England. We don't need to send this stuff up to New England, And there is a whole school about the Civil War, which is probably, as these things are, probably somewhat true, but not the total truth. So people pushed it too far. But it's like the economic argument for the Civil War, which is basically that the North, and the North here is like the Yankee areas that were industrializing, and not just simply engaging in transshipment trade like New York City, which was like an entrepot. That they wanted to close off the United States so that they could develop and catch up to England. Whereas the South obviously did not care about this, and in fact, their interests in the short term are to maximize profits. If you're a Southern planter, you have debts, stuff like that. Like you don't want to pay. You don't want there to be tariffs on export. Or you don't want there to be like not restrictions. I mean, it's not tariffs, but it would be there was various sorts of restrictions, right? De facto restrictions on sending it to England. They wanted to send it to New England, and that would obviously mean be good for New England industrialists, but it would not necessarily be good in the short term for Southern planters. So there's economic tensions here, and these tensions continue down to the present. We're having farmers who are very pro-Trump for domestic cultural reasons.
Right.
They're freaking out because farmers are always a lot of small time farmers, especially the big farmers, like big corporations are a little different. They have some ability to withstand these shocks. They need like government subsidies, all these other things just to like survive. They're on the margin. This tariff shock is gonna. I mean, because we are like one of the biggest agricultural exporters in the world. Right. So if other people put tariffs on us, if we cause chaos in the global system of trade, it's horrible for farmers. And I've been bringing this up in several podcasts, and I've been talking on Twitter. During the Obama administration, just Republicans would say, we need stability, like all of these taxes and other things that they're doing. They're introducing instability. Businesses can't plan. I mean, they obviously cannot plan right now, right? And so there's all these, actually, we should probably talk a little bit. I mean, so I said there's the foreign policy and there's the domestic. Let's talk about the foreign policy stuff later, because this is going to have an effect on America in the world and our vision for America. But the domestic stuff is a lot of people are annoyed and angry, of the hollowing out of America and deindustrialization and what happened to NAFTA. I mean, talk to these people because, a lot of it is, they're not making arguments, but they're pissed and they want it all burned down. I think that's ultimately what's going on here.
Right. Yeah. I will say, I think, and I was just looking at some data on this, earlier this morning. Some people will blame NAFTA for a decline in manufacturing or other things like that. I don't think the data supports that. Manufacturing employment did decline. It was already. Manufacturing employment in the U.S. as a percentage of total employment, I think, has been declining since the 1960s or 50s, something like that, right? And I don't even think if you were to look at a chart, you would not be able to, and you didn't know when NAFTA was passed. I don't know that you would be able to pick it out on the chart, right? Manufacturing output is different than manufacturing employment. Manufacturing output is still pretty robust. Even today, the U.S. manufactures a lot of stuff. It's a smaller portion of our total economy because our total economy is so big. But that doesn't mean that we're not making a lot of stuff and even exporting a lot of stuff. So, in particular with NAFTA, it just does not seem, it seems like it's actually been a pretty good economic thing for us. And then also, one element that, you wanted to talk about foreign policy later, but I do think an understated element of NAFTA is, Mexico used to be a really poor country, and having a really poor country on your southern border, it causes all sorts of other issues. Now, Mexico is really a middle income country, if you look at it, especially the northern parts of the country. And that I think is beneficial to the United States in all sorts of other ways that aren't directly economic. It helped, like, Mexico is mostly dried up as a source of illegal immigration, for example. Um, it's helpful in terms of other foreign things as well. So that's a element that's helpful. Um, it does seem like there is some data to suggest that they call it like the China shock or whatever. That maybe the situation with China is a little different in terms of the negative effects it had on manufacturing or other things, especially in the Midwest. Um, so that's more of an open question, but overall, I mean, I would say trade tends to be good for a country, right? It makes products cheaper. It gives us, people can export more, right? We can make more money. Products are cheaper. Quality of life goes up, and so that's one thing. And then a second thing that I think is even more important is whatever you think about the decision to open up trade in the past, over the past 50 years or whatever it is. Now, the economy is so globally integrated that it's not like you can just hammer foreign imports and not expect it to impact everything else, right? So, you could say, okay, well, look, there's a tariff on foreign cars, but I don't care. I'll just buy an American car. That won't be that, that they don't have to pay the tariff. But American cars, the tariff is also on intermediate products. It's not just final products. So, not just the car, but any auto part, or tool or other things that they need in order to make that car. A lot of those are going to be imported, so there's going to be tax, right? Steel, other raw materials it's made for, tariff applies to those too, right? So just up and down the line, a, energy example, since this is top of my mind, the U.S. We are a net oil exporter in the U.S., but we still import quite a bit of oil from Canada. Why? It's because we have a bunch of refineries here. So we import crude oil from Canada, ship it down to the Gulf, refine it, and then we export it to other countries and sell it, right? Well, okay, like if you can't import the oil, like if the oil if the crude oil becomes more expensive, that hurts our oil exports paradoxically, because of all the refineries. So everything is just so integrated and complicated that trying to go after it with a sledgehammer like this, it's gonna affect everything, right? If these tariffs continue, and what kind of scale are we talking about? I mean, we're not. I don't think we're talking about like Great Depression scale, but it. I mean, it definitely could tip us into recession. Which would not be.
Look, if people were angry about Biden inflation,
Yeah.
you'd be really pissed about this.
Right. Well, and we could end up with inflation too, because
It's a supply shock. It's a supply shock.
it's a supply shock, and the response is, okay, well, the Fed needs to cut rates, to deal with this, but inflation is still above the Fed's 2% target. So if they start cutting rates again, inflation could go back up. Um, so there's just, and people don't like that either. So there's just no good answer to all of this.
I mean, also, like, this is just a massive own goal. Like, the Fed, like, intervenes when stuff is happening that's out of our control, some big foreign policy thing that causes some supply shock, or oil markets go crazy. And because, like, if you just have like higher oil prices, that just can induce a recession because it just affects everything in the economy, price wise. Okay, but I mean, this is Trump has just decided to basically throw everything into chaos, and now you're asking the Fed to put Humpty Dumpty back together. Like, the Fed might just be like, okay, you know what? I mean, you voted for this guy. You
Right.
know,
Well, I mean, they don't, I do think the Fed has a apolitical sense of its mission that, like whatever they think about the policy, they're going to try and do their best
stabilize.
to stabilize. Although they, that doesn't necessarily mean, I think Powell had some comments earlier that were kind of that were kind of telegraphing. Now we're not planning on cutting a bunch right now, because they are still worried about inflation and other things. So I don't think you can kind of see this as a get out of jail free card. Um, one thing that, uh, one thing that kind of worries me a little bit. I mean, it's not a good sign. I'll say this is that like, we know a lot of people who are like, uh, very MAGA and feel the need to kind of like justify this stuff somehow, right? And what I have noticed over the last, week or uh, whatever period of time is that the justifications have have like progressively gotten darker and darker, So at first it was like, okay, this is actually going to be great, for the economy. Everything's going to be, good. We're going to like restore our sovereignty or whatever. And then it's like, well, actually, I mean, there'll be a little bit of pain, but it's just transitionary. And then, now you start, people are like, well, you know what? Do people actually care about their 401ks? Do people, maybe the economy is the underlying dynamics of the economy. We're just in such a dire strait that we kind of need a huge fiscal crisis to set everything out, right? I mean, these are like, this is the positive spin that you can put on it, is that like, well, maybe this is a necessary, collapse, right? And I don't personally, I think the U.S. economy has a lot of problems. I think we we have a big debt problem. We have other problems for the economy. For the life of me, I can't see how these tariffs do anything to address that. And I don't think, um, I think, we've discussed previously that I am a skeptic of the you need to lose now to win later type of political arguments. And I also kind of feel that way about the economy. I don't think like, well, we need to provoke a recession now to avoid a bigger one later. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of skeptical of that sort of thinking. I don't think that this was something that like Trump could tomorrow just say, hey, you know what? I've won. I'm declaring victory. I'm canceling all the tariffs or whatever. And I don't think anyone who's saying this stuff now would be like, oh man, we didn't get to have the like cleansing fire that the nation really needed. Right. That's my suspicion.
Yeah. No one's. Most people are not asking for this. Our friend Matt Peterson. I think, is he at New Founding? Where's Matt Peterson right now? He's in Dallas now, and he was at Claremont for a while, and and, like Jonathan actually. What?
Is he at like a Daily Wires? I don't know.
Oh, he's a Blaze. You got it.
Blaze, yes.
The Blaze. No, that was close. That was close. Okay.
The other Dallas related
Yeah, and I
conservative.
just want to talk about people we know, people I respect, that I'm friendly terms with, just because like I don't really know what to say because and Jonathan Keeperman Lomez also posted something similar, and it was about deindustrialization and pictures and stuff, and I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, I get what you're saying, like fucked up shit happened, but like, what does this have to do with that?
Right.
What does this have to do with deindustrialization? Because the economy changes, and maybe we didn't deal with it the best. I mean, I do think there is a fair point that the elite, Republican and Democrat, just like did not care too much about, high wage jobs for blue collar, manufacturing workers, disappearing, but they did care about outsourcing of service sector workers and say during George W. Bush's administration. And that was just because those service sector workers were part of the socioeconomic spectrum of the people that are writing or thinking in policy circles, and the blue collar workers are not. Okay, that's a legit thing. We can't have a discussion about how much decentralization we want in the economy. I think most people know, and I'll get into this later maybe, I'm not with JD and other people who are like, oh, we should like bring back these medium-sized towns and have decentralization. I believe in agglomeration effects,
Yeah.
and I think that someone was saying, who was it? It was on Dorkesh Patel's podcast. You guys should check it out. But with Joe Henrik about like why Shenzhen, the Shenzhen area in southern China, southeast China, where so there's Guangdong, and there's Hong Kong, and the other cities. I mean, like cities we don't know about there are like larger than New York City. Okay, like let me just look it up. Shenzhen area is like, I mean, how many million? So the city of Shenzhen has 17.5 million people. Okay, most Americans don't know what Shenzhen is, but it's yeah, and it's in the special economic zone. And let me just double check. Like, how, I mean, it's not really special anymore, but it was. It was one of the starters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
So
think
Shenzhen.
Americans know 4 cities. They know 4 cities in China. They know
Yeah.
Beijing, they know Hong Kong, they know Shanghai, and now we know Wuhan. We didn't used to know about
Yeah.
Wuhan. Now we know Wuhan.
Well, I mean, if you just say like the province of Guangdong, that whole province has 127 million people, and then also, I mean, Hong Kong is what, like another 10 million,
Right.
and so that whole area is just like kind of an integrated economic zone, and I think yeah, Hong Kong has 7.4 million people. Okay, so it's like 135 million people that are in Guangdong and that region of Southeast China. They're all like cheek by jowl. Like we have California, and it's got like two like big urban areas. It's got 40 million people, 20 million, or like 15 million, and like I think like 25, whatever, something like that. We don't have anything that compares to the scale. I'm not saying that we're gonna have that scale, but like we can try to go in that direction and have some agglomeration. Um, focus on the internal dynamics here of like what we're worried about in this country, and we're worried about our economic development and our competitiveness. Our competitiveness is not going to be improved by telling people that they should move to Lubbock and Amarillo and Waco. People should move to Dallas, Houston, and the San Antonio, Austin area. I mean, I'm giving a Texas-centric perspective. I'm starting small bore. If you want to maximize economic output, if that's what you want. If you don't want to maximize economic output, you want something else, that's fine. But then we got to have that discussion about what America is becoming, and let's talk about that later. But I think like there's all these domestic policy concerns that people do have, and I do sympathize with them. But I mean, I'm just gonna say it, like it's kind of like with the Democratic Socialist types, or the Bernie types, where it's like I do sympathize with some of the things that they're saying and some of their anger, but their solutions are just like what,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know? And so like this is how I'm feeling. Like, what does tariffs have to do with this, bro?
Yeah. Yeah. It is tough, and some of it. I mean, there are even other things where, uh, like I was talking with someone about during the Biden administration, there was a baby formula shortage. I don't know if you recall this or whatever. And okay, so like part of the solution to baby formula shortage is to make it easier for us to import formula from other countries, right? Because that was like part of it. So like, and apparently HHS or the administration was, or maybe is, working on some sort of executive order to do that, to make it easier to get baby formula from other countries to kind of relieve that shortage. Well, and that seems like a really good thing to me, but it's completely undercut or at cross purposes if you're slapping huge tariffs on not only baby formula, but anything else like that we want to bring in from other countries. So I don't know. I mean, I feel you know there is, I think, something um which is kind of pre-analytical in terms of people. This I there in some I think there is a sense in which this does tie back into the whole uh controversy from a couple months ago about people with jobs managing Chipotle's or whatever, right? Where in somehow a job in a factory at an auto plant feels more real or valid in some way than a job managing, uh, a casual dining restaurant, even if the pay is better in the casual dining place, even if the working conditions are better, whatever. It just feels like uh, there's an aura around it for some people where they feel like, okay, we need to get that back. We need those jobs back. Um, Even though, frankly, a lot of those jobs were not. I mean, they were kind of crappy. If I'm going to be perfectly honest, about it. Um, Even in comparison to like the service jobs that we have now.
Wait, have you ever done any type of manufacturing work?
I have never had a manufacturing type job. I don't think. No, everything.
Yeah, to the manner born.
The only the only thing I've manufactured are like pizzas.
I will say,
Sandwiches.
yeah, I will say, I actually never had a food service job. I have had one job when I was a youth. So I mean, I guess like the type of like crap jobs that I had was like, like a call center. I worked as a landscaper actually for a couple of summers. Some people know I worked also when I was in high school, I worked at a mule ranch. So I did like kind of laboring stuff, but I did have one light industrial type manufacturing job, and it was basically we were making. Dude, I don't know this stuff because I don't know sound stuff, but it was like for huge speakers that you have at concerts. Like we were making like something on the like kind of a scaffold around them to like dampen their vibration or something.
Yeah.
So it was light manufacturing. It was in like a light industrial area well, I mean, I should say it was in Eugene, Oregon. It was in a light industrial area, and it was in a building that was a climate controlled and everything. But here's the thing, and I don't know why this is. I think there's some like reason, like in terms of manufacturing, but um, there were no windows in the building, right? And it's one of the things where you could do like a 6-hour shift, or a 12-hour shift. And this was like a Christmas job. Over Christmas job, I decided to take this just because I want to make money over Christmas. I'm not going to school. Well, what ended up happening was, I decided to do the 12-hour shifts. It's not a unionized job, so I could do whatever. I decided to do the 12-hour shifts, and so there was one shift that would go from 6 a.m. to 12 p.m., and then another shift that would go from like 1 to 7 or something.
Yeah.
I'm telling you this because like I saw like 1 hour of light, of like normal light, for like those 3 weeks of Christmas break every day.
Right.
It was okay. It wasn't a bad job, but I'm just saying, like, it wasn't like, yay, I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to take my shower, to go to my job, making these things for the speakers. And then, I start at 6 and I go, there's like tiny breaks, whatever. It wasn't like, I wasn't like, slavery or anything like that. I was getting paid pretty well. And then I had like a 1 hour lunch break. And then I do the second shift, and then I get off at 7 and it's dark because it's December in Oregon. Okay. And so, I mean, it was good. It was like, the upside was like the pay was pretty good. It was better than if I had worked at Subway or something like that, which I never did do any food service jobs.
Right.
But like you don't really, I mean, you don't really interact with people. You kind of do, but like it's not like it seems like food service people like interact with people a lot. Obviously, didn't interact with people,
Yeah.
and another upside of it is like I went home, I was tired, but like I didn't have to fucking think about that job. Like
Right.
like the jobs that I have now, the jobs that we have now, like we gotta like send emails and do other random things. So that's the upside. But they're kind of like draining jobs when you're on the job and then it's over, right? So that's the upside. Um, but I mean, obviously, like we both are, professional, managerial class, whatever term you want to use. So it's in a different situation. And I don't know. I think we were listening to the editors podcast and stuff like that, and Michael Brendan Doherty was talking about like working in manufacturing jobs. It's just like a thing that a lot of people do. And
I
yeah.
think it's perfectly fine, and we have a lot of manufacturing jobs. I just I don't you know I don't view it as a kind of overriding spiritual necessity that like we have to get that the health of the nation is determined by your manufacturing employment percentage of your economy or something. You have to do all this stuff that is hugely painful in all sorts of other ways, for what? For that purpose, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And
So we've been talking about the domestic stuff. Let's pivot like to paid and like foreign policy in a second. This is what I'm gonna say. Okay. What I'm gonna say is, in terms of domestic stuff. Okay. One, this policy does not help what you're pissed about.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm sorry, like, if you're pissed about deindustrialization, if you're pissed about this policy does not help it. This is crazy, okay? If you're gonna do tariffs, you gotta do targeted tariffs, you gotta do gradual tariffs, you gotta have, like, so that the economy can adapt and businesses can change their supply chains and all those things, right? To prevent disruption. This is just like chaos, okay? What this is like is shock therapy, okay?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
This is shock therapy, okay? So that's one thing. The second thing, and we alluded to this, we haven't like gone deep into it because we don't know, but I think this is going to undermine the rest of the domestic agenda. I think it's going to. I think like Ibram Kendi not looking so bad if my paycheck is going to get bigger. You know what I'm saying? I'm exaggerating, but you know what I'm saying.
I do, yeah, and I think that this is a big risk. I know people. I've talked to people who were they weren't like hardcore MAGA people, but they were pro Republican or whatnot, and now they're saying, "Oh, I'm going to vote Democrat or whatever," and the Democratic Party is not that those elements are still in there. Where if they get swept in on a wave of people who are dissatisfied with the economy, but they still have the same like cultural, woke views or whatever, and that stuff can come back, I think, to some degree. Last thing I will say before we go to paywall, because I did want to say this, is that, you alluded to before that, like, I'm not a squish. And as I say, I'm supportive of most of like the president's agenda and other things like that. And I do know for a lot of people, um, you know, because of loyalty or coalitional politics or other stuff, right? There can be a temptation to say, I don't really like these tariff things, but maybe I should like keep quiet about it or not say anything. I don't I'm not deluded into thinking that I personally have any particular influence in terms of actual policy or whatever. But I do think if you are generally MAGA friendly and you want the administration to succeed, like now is the time, I would say, where it makes the most sense to make the most oppositional noise, right? Because this is something that Trump can just decide to change, right? And we're early enough that if he were to just decide to change it, I don't know that there would be any serious long-term political or economic consequences. Maybe there would be some, but for the most part, it can still be undone, and Trump, it is
Yeah,
possible that Trump could just like, if he sees a lot of backlash between, including from people who have been like his strong allies and other things, he might just be like, oh, well, maybe we'll back off on this, right? Which he's done even on the like previous tariffs, the more,
yeah,
it seems like he's more dug in here, but if they're, if you're gonna if if you're gonna criticize a policy like this, now is the time to do it. Don't wait until like 18 months from now when everything has gone uh,
yeah,
to
yeah.
hell, and then you're like, oh well, man, that was stupid. You shouldn't have done that, right? That
Exactly. If you really care about the policies as opposed to your
right,
social standing, speak up now.
right,
People have been saying like I think Armand, I don't know, it's like Polish, but I mean, people have been like joking that Elon hasn't been saying anything. Obviously, Elon thinks this is crazy. But the problem is like he's basically in the administration. He's a confidant. I'm sure he's saying things, but there's different roles for different people. I have friends who are very tightly integrated with the administration, whether they're in it or not, and they're like, so I went to DC actually a week and a half ago. Was it a week and a half ago now? And basically, the tariff stuff. Like a friend of mine, mutual who a very very influential live player. Like let's put it that way. I
right,
think you know who I'm talking about. And he's like, look, the tariff stuff is retarded. There's a lot of stuff that Trump is doing that's retarded, and he's very honest about it. And privately. But
right,
he's on the team. That's his bread and butter. These are his relationships. He can't do that, okay? He can't like just speak out. He could. That's why people like resign and they make a big huff.
okay,
But that's like that's a one shot. You got a one shot on that,
yeah.
okay? So those people have their roles, and I don't. Everyone has their role. I'm not. First of all, I'm not as.
You're not a political
I don't
person.
I'm just trying to because obviously people are like, oh well, some people think I'm really right wing, and some people think I'm not political, or maybe I'm a liberal. It's people get really confused because I just say what I think, and depending on what they're sampling, they get a weird perception, right? So in general, obviously, I'm 1,000% on board with the DEI stuff. Okay, a lot of the domestic stuff, I'm sympathetic to Doge in a lot of ways. I hold my fire. I think the execution has some problems, but I'm sympathetic to these ideas. Okay. But when it comes to obviously the tariff stuff, it's just driving me crazy. Okay. And so I'm just gonna tell people because it's driving me crazy. And as you said, this is an independent action. He has political capital and he's burning it down. He is burning it down for the tariffs. He is burning down the goodwill when it comes to the DEI and all this cultural politics that we had to deal with for the last decade, which I am 100% on his side, as are many people. But only a minority of people are on the tariff side, right? And so it's just what do you really care about, bro? Are you showing, telling us who you are, what you really care about? I don't know. I mean, do you really care about this more than, these cultural politics? Now, okay, Payball, let's pivot to the foreign policy thing. Okay. Hope you enjoyed the podcast so far. To listen to the rest of it, please go to conversation.substack.com.
Two minds met on a summer's eve, each with truths they long believed. Words flowed like a winding stream as hours passed in deep debate. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. In listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, of history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, of history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. It's not about who's wrong or right, but understanding others' light. In civil discourse we can find ties that gently bind. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. As dawn broke soft on dewy grass, they smiled and shook hands at last. Two souls enriched by reason talk, united in respect. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. This folk song captures the essence of a long, thoughtful discussion between two public intellectuals. It emphasizes the power of patient listening, mutual respect, and the discovery of common ground. The gentle tone reflects the calm and understanding they reach after their debate. Would you like me to expand on any